I never thought I'd be the one telling a story like this. I'm not religious, at least I wasn't before. I was just a regular guy from Oklahoma who joined the Army because college wasn't working out, and I needed direction. My name's Michael Ritter. I was a sergeant with the 3rd Infantry Division, Mechanized Infantry. I did 2 tours in Iraq, 2004 and 2007. This happened during my 2nd tour. Before I get into what happened, you should know something about me. I was the skeptical guy in the platoon. Whenever anyone talked about God or guardian angels or anything spiritual, I'd be the first one with a sarcastic comment. I believed in what I could see, touch, and prove. The guys in my squad used to call me Professor because I'd always demand evidence for everything. That changed on April 16, 2007, outside Bakuba. It was my 347th day in country on that deployment. Yeah, I counted. Everyone does. We were doing what we called presence patrols, basically driving around in our Humvees, showing the flag, trying to reassure civilians while deterring the bad guys. Standard stuff we'd done hundreds of times. The kind of mission where complacency can set in if you're not careful. Our squad was part of a larger convoy, 4 Humvees total. I was vehicle commander in the 3rd vehicle. My driver was Specialist Rodriguez, Rod, to us. On the .50 cal was Private First Class Miller, young kid from Michigan on his first deployment. And riding shotgun was our medic, Specialist Dawson. We'd been together the whole deployment, knew each other's habits, quirks, everything. That morning had started like any other. Up before dawn, weapons check, vehicle check, brief, then roll out. The weather was decent, not too hot yet. Spring in Iraq can actually be pretty nice before the summer heat hits. We'd been on the road for about 2 hours moving between villages. Looking back, there were warning signs. The marketplace we drove through was emptier than it should have been. Fewer kids running alongside the vehicles begging for candy. Rod noticed it first. "Seems quiet today, Sarge," he said, eyes scanning the road ahead. "Maybe they finally learned not to crowd military vehicles," I replied. Miller chimed in from the turret. "Or maybe they know something we don't." I remember feeling a slight chill when he said that. Not that I believed in premonitions, but in hindsight, it's hard not to see it that way. We continued our patrol, moving from the larger town to some of the outlying villages. The route took us along a narrow road with dense palm groves on one side and drainage ditches on the other. It was a natural choke point, the kind of place we'd normally be extra alert. But like I said, after hundreds of patrols, fatigue sets in. Not that we were sloppy, we were professional soldiers. But there's a difference between being alert and having that razor-sharp edge of fear that keeps you alive in the early days of deployment. I was checking the map, coordinating our next turn with the lead vehicle over the radio, when everything went sideways. The first IED hit the lead Humvee. In the confined space of that road, the sound was deafening. A massive percussion that you feel in your chest before your ears even register it. The vehicle jumped like a toy, the armored undercarriage doing its job but still absorbing tremendous force. Before any of us could react, the second IED detonated near the second vehicle. Not a direct hit, but close enough to disable it, shrapnel peppering the right side. Then the shooting started. AK fire from the palm groves, RPGs screaming in. Contact right, I shouted, though everyone already knew. The radio exploded with traffic. Everyone reporting at once, the lieutenant trying to coordinate a response. Miller opened up with the .50 cal, returning fire into the tree line where muzzle flashes betrayed enemy positions. Rod maneuvered our Humvee to provide cover for the disabled second vehicle. Dawson was already prepping his aid bag, knowing he'd have casualties to treat soon. "Get us behind that berm," I ordered Rod, pointing to a slight rise that could give us some cover. That's when the third IED went off, right under us. Time does strange things in moments like that. It stretches and compresses simultaneously. I remember the initial shock, the vehicle lifting, the incredible noise that seemed to suck all the air from my lungs. I remember seeing the floor plates of the Humvee buckle upward, the radio flying from its mount. And then I was floating outside my body, watching as our vehicle settled back onto its wheels, smoke pouring from the undercarriage. I could see Miller slumped in the turret, blood streaming down his face. Rod was motionless against the steering wheel. Dawson was moving, though barely, trying to reach for his medical bag. And I saw myself still strapped in my seat, chest covered in blood, not moving. That's when I realized I wasn't just injured. I was dying, maybe already dead. The firefight continued around what was left of our convoy. The fourth vehicle was returning fire, troops disembarking to establish a perimeter. Someone was dragging wounded men from the second vehicle. I wanted to help them, but I couldn't. I was just watching. Then something pulled me away from the scene. Not a physical sensation. I didn't have a physical body anymore, but a drawing, like being gently but firmly guided away from the chaos below. At first I resisted. Those were my men down there, my friends. I couldn't leave them. But the pull was persistent, and suddenly I wasn't looking at the ambush site anymore. I was moving through what I can only describe as a tunnel, though it wasn't solid like a physical tunnel. It was composed of light. Not blinding, but soft, warm light that seemed to pulse with life. I've thought a lot about how to describe this part, and words always fail me. How do you describe colors that don't exist on Earth? How do you explain sensations when you no longer have a body to feel them with? The closest I can come is to say it felt like being embraced by pure understanding. Like every question I'd ever had was being answered simultaneously, though I couldn't articulate a single answer. As I moved through this tunnel of light, I began to sense presences around me. Not scary, just present, aware, conscious, and somehow familiar, though I couldn't yet see them clearly. The tunnel opened into a vast, space isn't the right word. It wasn't empty, and it wasn't exactly a place. It was more like a state of being. The light was everywhere now, not coming from any particular source, just existing as the fundamental property of this reality. And that's when I saw them, the soldiers who had gone before. They stood in loose formation, thousands of them stretching back further than I could comprehend. Men and women in uniforms from every era of American military history. Civil War soldiers with their distinctive caps and beards stood alongside Marines in modern desert camo. A World War II paratrooper with his jump boots and distinctive helmet nodded at me. A Vietnam-era Green Beret gave me a slight smile. I recognized some of them, not from history books, but personally. There was Hernandez, who'd been killed by a sniper 3 months earlier. Wallace, who died when his vehicle hit an IED outside Fallujah during my first tour. And others from training accidents and previous deployments. Men I'd served with. Men I'd buried. They didn't speak, not with words, but I understood them perfectly. They were the guardians, the ones who stood watch on the other side. Not stuck or haunting the battlefield, but transcended, transformed into something more than they had been in life, yet still essentially themselves. One figure moved forward from the group. As he approached, I recognized him, Staff Sergeant James Collins. He'd been our platoon sergeant during my first deployment until he was killed securing a building we'd been ordered to clear. I'd been right behind him when it happened. He'd been like a mentor to me, teaching me how to be a good NCO, how to take care of my men. Collins looked just as I remembered him, but also somehow more vibrant, more essentially himself, without the weariness that combat puts on a soldier's face. He smiled at me, and without words I understood his message. Not your time yet, Professor. I wanted to stay. Despite the peace and beauty of this place, it wasn't just about escaping the pain and chaos of war. There was purpose here, meaning that made sense of all the suffering we'd endured. I felt like I finally understood what we'd been fighting for, and it was so much bigger than the reasons we'd been given. Collins shook his head, still smiling, and placed a hand on my shoulder. Again, without words, I understood. You have more to do. You need to tell them what you've seen. I tried to ask questions. Who should I tell? What exactly am I supposed to say? But Collins was already receding, the entire formation of soldiers moving back as the light began to shift and pulse around me. That's when I became aware of another presence, something far greater than the soldiers, something vast and loving that permeated everything in this realm. It wasn't human, wasn't something I could see in any defined form, but I sensed it as clearly as I've ever sensed anything. This presence communicated with me, not in English or any human language, but directly into whatever was left of my consciousness. What I understood was this: everything has purpose. Every life, every death, every moment of suffering and joy fits into a pattern too complex for human minds to grasp. But the pattern is real and it is good. The presence, God, the universe, whatever name feels right to you, showed me glimpses of this pattern, how the seemingly random events of my life had led me to precise moments where I'd made a difference, often without realizing it. The time I'd talked a new private through his homesickness. The Iraqi child I'd given medical care to after a marketplace bombing. The letter I'd written to a fallen comrade's parents. None of these seemed significant at the time, but I was shown how each action rippled outward, affecting lives in ways I couldn't have imagined. Nothing was wasted, nothing was truly random. Then the presence communicated something else, something that would become my message to bring back. Tell them that the light is real and it waits for everyone. Tell them that love persists beyond death. Tell them that what divides us in life is meaningless in death. I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I was experiencing, by the responsibility of carrying this message. How could I, with my limited human vocabulary and understanding, possibly convey what I was being shown? I wasn't a spiritual person. I didn't have the language for this. The presence seemed to understand my doubt. It intensified around me, and suddenly I was flooded with a feeling of unconditional love so powerful that it would have brought me to my knees if I'd still had a physical body. In that moment, I understood that the message didn't need perfect articulation. It just needed to be shared honestly from my experience. The scene began to shift again. The vast expanse of light started to contract around me. The soldiers, Collins, Hernandez, all of them, raised their hands in salute. Not a formal military salute, but a gesture of farewell and blessing. I felt myself being drawn back, away from the light, away from the understanding and peace that had surrounded me. I didn't want to go. Despite knowing I had a message to carry, the thought of returning to the pain and chaos of that roadside in Iraq was almost unbearable after experiencing this realm. But I had no choice in the matter. The decision had been made. I was going back. The transition wasn't instant. I moved back through the tunnel of light, but slower this time, as if I was being given a chance to prepare myself for re-entry into my broken body. As I traveled, I became aware of other presences accompanying me. Not the soldiers I'd seen before, but something different. Guardians, for lack of a better word. They seemed to be ensuring my safe return. One of these presences communicated to me, "Remember as much as you can. The details will fade. They must for you to function in your world. But hold on to the essence of what you've been shown." I promised I would try. As I approached what I somehow knew was the boundary between worlds, the sensations began to change. The warmth and peace of the light realm started to recede, replaced by something heavier, denser. I began to feel pain again. Distant at first, then increasingly present. Weight returned to me, gravity, the awareness of a physical form that was badly damaged. And then suddenly I was back in my body in the Humvee. The return was violent, jarring. One moment I was suspended in light, the next I was crashed back into unbelievable pain. Every nerve ending seemed to be on fire. My chest felt crushed. My ears rang with the lingering echoes of the explosion and gunfire. I could hear shouting around me, feel hands pulling at me. Someone was calling my name. "Sergeant Ritter." "Mike!" "Stay with us, man." It was Dawson, our medic. Somehow he'd survived the blast with only minor injuries. He was working on me, his hands covered in my blood, his face tight with concentration. "He's back. I've got a pulse," he shouted to someone I couldn't see. The pain was overwhelming, but strangely, I wasn't afraid anymore. I tried to speak, to tell Dawson about what I'd seen, but I couldn't form words. Something was wrong with my lungs, my throat. I tasted blood. Dawson leaned close. "Don't try to talk, Sarge. Medevac is inbound. 5 minutes. Just stay with me, okay? Stay with me." I wanted to tell him I wasn't going anywhere, that I'd been sent back for a reason, but darkness was closing in again. Not the comforting darkness that had preceded the light, but the simple darkness of unconsciousness. The last thing I remember before passing out again was a strange sense of dual awareness. Part of me was fully present in that shattered Humvee, feeling every stab of pain and hearing every sound of the ongoing firefight. But another part of me still felt connected to that other realm, as if a door had been opened that couldn't fully close again. Then everything went black. I don't know how much time passed before I was aware again. It might have been minutes or hours. When consciousness returned, I was no longer in the Humvee or even on that road outside Bakuba. The sounds were different. Mechanical beeping, hushed voices, the whoosh of air conditioning. The smells too. Antiseptic, clean sheets, medical plastic. I tried to open my eyes but couldn't. Something was taped over them. I tried to move and found I couldn't do that either. Not paralysis. I could feel everything, unfortunately, including considerable pain, but restraint. Tubes and wires and bandages holding me in place. A voice nearby. American female professional. A nurse. Blood pressure's rising. He might be coming around. Footsteps approached. A different voice, male this time. "Sergeant Ritter? Can you hear me? If you can hear me, try to move your left index finger." I concentrated all my effort on that simple task. After what seemed like forever, I felt my finger twitch. "Good, that's good," the male voice said. You're at the Combat Support Hospital in Balad. You've been in surgery. You're stable now. Don't try to talk. You're intubated. Just rest. I wanted to ask about my squad, about Rod, Miller, Dawson, about everyone else in the convoy, but I couldn't speak around the tube in my throat. I wanted to tell them about what I'd seen, about the tunnel of light and the soldiers and the message I was supposed to deliver. But all I could do was lie there as darkness claimed me again. The next few days, or maybe it was weeks, came in fragments. Brief moments of consciousness punctuated by long periods of nothing. Sometimes I'd hear voices, doctors discussing my injuries, nurses changing my bandages. Sometimes I'd catch snippets about extensive internal bleeding and shrapnel damage and cardiac arrest during surgery. That last one stuck with me. Cardiac arrest. My heart had stopped. I had died on the operating table, just as I had died, or come close enough, in that Humvee during the ambush. Had I gone back to that place of light during surgery? If I had, I didn't remember it. Gradually, the periods of consciousness grew longer. The tube was removed from my throat. The dressings over my eyes were replaced with simple bandages. I learned to communicate by squeezing hands. Once for yes, twice for no. Do you know where you are? A doctor asked. I squeezed once. Yes, the CSH at Balad. Do you remember what happened? Once again, the ambush, the IED, the tunnel of light. I'm going to ask about your squad. Specialist Rodriguez? I waited, heart pounding. He didn't make it. I'm sorry. Rod was dead. My driver, my friend, the guy who'd noticed something was wrong that morning. I squeezed the doctor's hand in acknowledgement, feeling tears leak from under my bandages. PFC Miller survived but lost his right arm above the elbow. He's already been transported to Germany. One squeeze. At least Miller was alive. Specialist Dawson has a concussion and some shrapnel wounds, but he's okay. He's been asking about you. Actually, he's the one who kept you alive until medevac arrived. Relief flooded through me. Dawson had made it. He'd saved my life. The doctor continued, updating me on the others in the convoy. The lieutenant had survived with serious burns. 2 more men had died. 4 others had injuries of varying severity. Every loss felt like a personal failure, though rationally I knew there was nothing more I could have done. Later that day, or maybe it was the next, time was still fluid, they finally removed the bandages from my eyes. The light was painfully bright at first and everything was blurry, but gradually my vision cleared. I saw for the first time the extent of my injuries, or at least the parts I could see from my hospital bed. My chest and left arm were heavily bandaged. My right leg was elevated and immobilized in some kind of medical contraption. A different doctor, an Army major with tired eyes, explained the damage. You took shrapnel through the left chest cavity, collapsed lung, lacerated liver. Your left arm has multiple fractures. Right femur is broken in 2 places. There's some facial lacerations that are healing well. You also had a moderate traumatic brain injury from the blast, which is why we kept your eyes covered, to reduce stimulation. He paused, looking at me carefully. You also flatlined twice, once in the field and once during surgery. Frankly, it's something of a miracle you're still with us. Not a miracle, I wanted to tell him. A mission. I was sent back. But when I tried to speak, only a raspy whisper came out. My throat was raw from the intubation. Don't push it, the doctor advised. Your vocal cords are irritated from the tube. Give it time. Over the next few days, my condition improved enough for them to prepare me for transport to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, the next stop before heading back to the States. One evening, as a nurse was checking my vitals, I managed to whisper a request. Dawson, can I see him? She looked uncertain. Specialist Dawson? I think he's still here, waiting for transport. I'll check. An hour later, Dawson appeared at my bedside. He looked different from how I remembered him. Younger somehow, more vulnerable without his gear and weapon. A white bandage wrapped around his head, and his left arm was in a sling. But he was alive, solid, real. Sarge, he said, voice thick with emotion. You look like hell. I managed a small smile. Feel like it too. He pulled up a chair beside the bed. They told me you might not make it. When they loaded you on that helicopter, I thought... He trailed off, swallowing hard. With effort, I reached out my less damaged right hand. He took it, our fingers clasping in that distinctive way soldiers grasp each other's hands. Firm, brief, communicating everything without words. You saved me, I whispered. Dawson shook his head. I just did what I was trained to do. No, I insisted, my voice slightly stronger. You brought me back. He looked at me strangely. What do you mean? I took a painful breath. This was it. The first time I would try to articulate what had happened to me. The first test of whether I could fulfill the mission I'd been given. I died out there, I said simply, or close enough. I saw something. The other side, Dawson's expression was unreadable. Was it skepticism? Concern? I couldn't tell. I saw Collins, I continued, and Hernandez. Wallace. All of them. Now his expression changed. Surprise, maybe fear. He knew all those names. Men we'd served with who hadn't made it home. Sarge, you had a major head injury. The doc said you might have some confusion. Not confused, I interrupted. Never been clearer. There's a light waiting for all of us. They're all there, Dawson. All the ones we lost. They're okay. Tears welled in his eyes. He looked away, blinking rapidly. Dawson had been close to Hernandez. They'd gone through medic training together. What ... What did Hernandez say? He asked finally, voice barely audible. They didn't speak. Not with words, but I understood them. I squeezed his hand. Hernandez is proud of you. For saving me. For everything. Dawson wiped his eyes with his good hand. This is crazy, Sarge. You know that, right? The brain does weird things when it's oxygen deprived. I nodded slowly. I know how it sounds. Believe me, I was the last person who would have believed this stuff before. But it was real, Dawson. More real than this room, than this conversation. And I was sent back to tell people. Tell people what? He asked, still skeptical but less dismissive now. That the light is real. That love continues after death. That the things that divide us here don't matter there. I paused, gathering strength. That everything has purpose. Even the worst things. Dawson was quiet for a long time. I could almost see the struggle in him. The scientific, medical part of his training, fighting against the part that wanted to believe his friends weren't just gone forever. Finally, he asked, what about Rod? Did you see him too? The question hit me hard. Rod had died in the same attack that nearly killed me. But I hadn't seen him in that place of light and soldiers. No, I admitted. But I think maybe he was still on his way there when I was sent back. Or maybe he was somewhere else I couldn't see yet. It was a weak answer, and we both knew it. But it was honest, and that seemed to matter to Dawson. I want to believe you, Sarge, he said quietly. God knows we could use some good news in this fucking war. You don't have to believe me. I told him, just remember what I said. Maybe someday it'll make sense. He nodded, standing up. I should let you rest. They're flying me out tomorrow morning. Take care of yourself, Dawson. And ... Thank you. For everything. He gave me a half smile. See you stateside, Sarge. After he left, I lay in my hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation. It hadn't gone as well as I'd hoped. If I couldn't convince Dawson, someone who knew me, who had been there, how would I ever convince anyone else? How could I possibly fulfill this mission I'd been given? For the first time since I'd returned from that place of light, I felt doubt creeping in. What if it had just been a hallucination, a trick of my oxygen-starved brain? What if I was clinging to a comforting fantasy rather than facing the harsh reality that Rod and all the others were simply gone? As these doubts swirled, something strange happened. The fluorescent light above my bed seemed to intensify. Not painfully bright, but somehow deeper, more significant. And in that moment, I felt again what I had felt in that other realm. A profound sense of being known and loved. Of everything having meaning beyond what I could comprehend. It lasted only seconds, but it was enough. The doubt receded. Whatever had happened to me was real, and my task was simple. To share it honestly, without trying to force anyone to believe. The understanding would come for those who needed it, when they needed it. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time since the ambush, dreaming not of explosions and gunfire, but of light and the faces of soldiers standing in formation, watching over me. The next morning, they loaded me onto a C-17 configured for medical transport. As we lifted off from Balad, I looked out the small window at the Iraqi landscape receding below. I was leaving behind friends, both the living and the dead, but carrying something with me that would forever connect us. I didn't know then how challenging the road ahead would be. The months of surgeries and physical therapy, the nightmares and PTSD, the struggle to reintegrate into civilian life. I didn't know how my story would be received, how many would dismiss it, and how many would find comfort in it. I didn't know that I would eventually stand before groups of veterans and families of the fallen, sharing what I had experienced and the message I had been given. All I knew, as that C-17 carried me away from the battlefield where I had died and returned, was that nothing would ever be the same again. I had crossed a threshold that few return from, and I had been fundamentally changed by what I had seen on the other side. The light I saw that day still gives me hope, not just for myself, but for all of us. Soldiers and civilians, believers and skeptics, the living and those who have passed beyond the veil. The message is simple but profound. We are never truly alone, never truly lost, and what awaits us is greater than what we leave behind. That's what I died to learn. That's why I came back. The flight to Germany was a blur of pain medication and fitful sleep. I remember fragments. Medics checking vitals, the vibration of the aircraft, the faces of other wounded soldiers being transported alongside me. Some were conscious and stoic, others unconscious, their lives hanging by threads thinner than mine had been. At Landstuhl, they stabilized me further and performed additional surgeries to remove remaining shrapnel and repair some of the damage to my leg. I was there for 9 days before being deemed stable enough for the longer flight to Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. It was there, in the long, quiet hours between medical procedures and physical therapy sessions, that I began to process what had happened to me. Not just the physical trauma, but the other experience, the one beyond death. The doctors and psychiatrists had their explanations, of course. Near-death experiences were well-documented phenomena with neurological explanations, they said. Oxygen deprivation, the brain's final desperate attempt to make sense of its own shutdown. Hallucinations triggered by trauma and medication. I nodded along with their explanations, not because I believed them, but because arguing seemed pointless. How could I explain that what I'd experienced felt more real than my hospital room? That the faces of those fallen soldiers were clearer in my memory than the faces of the doctors treating me? That the message I'd received continued to resonate within me with absolute clarity while other memories faded? My physical recovery was arduous. 3 more surgeries on my leg, countless hours of physical therapy, learning to walk again, procedures to remove more shrapnel that kept working its way to the surface of my skin, little metal reminders of that day that my body was gradually rejecting. My squad members visited when they could. Miller came to see me once he was back stateside, learning to navigate life with one arm. The first time I saw him, he was still figuring out the prosthetic, his movements awkward and frustrated, but his spirit was intact. "Looks like we both got rebuild jobs, Sarge," he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Dawson visited too, his physical wounds largely healed, but something haunted lingering in his gaze. He didn't bring up our conversation about what I'd seen, and I didn't force the issue. Some seeds need time to germinate. The lieutenant stopped by before returning to duty with a new platoon. He sat uncomfortably in the hospital chair, making small talk about the unit and carefully avoiding any mention of the men we'd lost. I could see the guilt he carried, though the ambush hadn't been his fault. Leadership burdens you that way. "Sir," I said toward the end of his visit, "can I tell you something that might sound crazy?" He looked startled, then composed himself. "Of course, Sergeant. When I was out during the ambush, I saw something." I hesitated, watching his reaction. "I saw the other side." His expression remained neutral, professional. "You mean you had a near-death experience?" "More than that. I saw our guys. Collins, Hernandez, Wallace." I paused. "Not Rodriguez, though. I think he was still on his way." The lieutenant's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. He'd been the one to write the letter to Rodriguez's parents. What ... "What did they say?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "They didn't speak, not really. But they wanted me to know they're okay. That there's purpose to everything, even when it seems senseless to us." He was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. Finally, he looked up, eyes glistening. "I'd like to believe that, Ritter. I really would. I know it sounds—" "No," he interrupted. "I mean, I'd actually like to believe it. My whole life I've wanted to believe there's something more. Something that makes sense of all this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the hospital, the war, everything. "If anyone would have seen it, it would be someone like you. Like me. Skeptical. Rational. Not prone to spiritual thinking." He gave a small, sad smile. "The professor. I was surprised he knew my nickname. Your men talk about you," he explained, with respect. Before he left, the lieutenant asked me one more question. "If you could tell Rodriguez's parents one thing about what you saw, what would it be?" I considered this carefully. "I'd tell them that their son isn't gone. He's just somewhere else now, somewhere good, and that the love they have for him still connects them. The lieutenant nodded, shook my hand, and left. I never saw him again. He deployed back to Iraq 6 weeks later and rotated to a different division after that. But I heard through the grapevine that he visited Rodriguez's parents personally while on leave. I don't know what he told them. As my physical recovery progressed, the hospital assigned me a psychiatrist, standard procedure for combat trauma cases. Dr. Levine was a civilian contractor, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. In our first session, she reviewed my file, noting the extensive physical injuries and the possible hallucinations during periods of reduced oxygen flow to the brain. I'd like to talk about what you experienced during the incident, she said after the preliminaries. The ambush or the dying part? I asked. Her expression remained neutral. Both, but let's start with the ambush itself. Can you walk me through what happened? I recounted the events. The patrol, the IEDs, the firefight. The clinical telling was easier than I expected, like giving an after-action report. Just the facts, no emotion. And after the explosion under your vehicle? She prompted. I hesitated. This was the turning point. Share the full truth or give the sanitized version. I died, I said simply. Or I was dying. My consciousness left my body. I saw my squad members, saw myself bleeding out. Then I was pulled away, through what felt like a tunnel of light. Doctor, Levine made a note but showed no surprise. Many people report similar experiences during traumatic incidents where the brain is deprived of oxygen. This wasn't a hallucination. I'm not suggesting it was, she said carefully. These experiences feel utterly real to those who have them. The brain is remarkably complex. It wasn't just my brain, I insisted. I saw things, people, I couldn't have known about. Her pen paused above her notepad. What do you mean? I saw soldiers who had died. Not just from my unit, but from all throughout history. They were waiting, watching, and I received a message to bring back. What was the message? She asked, her clinical detachment giving way to what seemed like genuine curiosity. That the light is real. That love continues beyond death. That what divides us here doesn't matter there. That everything has purpose. Doctor, Levine was quiet for a moment. That's a profound experience, Sergeant Ritter. Whether you interpret it spiritually or neurologically, it clearly had meaning for you. Not just for me, I said. I was sent back to share it. And do you plan to do that? Share your experience? I nodded. When I can, with people who might need to hear it. Our sessions continued twice weekly. Doctor, Levine never tried to convince me that what I'd experienced wasn't real, which I appreciated. Instead, she helped me process the trauma of the ambush, the loss of my friends, and the challenges of my new reality. Because that was the thing about coming back. Not just from death, but from war. Nothing fit quite right anymore. The world I returned to seemed simultaneously too loud and too quiet, too fast and too slow, too trivial and too overwhelming. My family struggled to understand. My parents, decent, hardworking people from small-town Oklahoma, visited me at Walter Reed as often as they could. They brought home-cooked food, photos from home, updates about neighbors and old school friends, anchors to a life that felt increasingly distant. My father, a Vietnam veteran who had never spoken much about his own service, sat awkwardly by my bedside, patting my hand occasionally, asking about my physical recovery, but carefully avoiding deeper waters. My mother was more direct. The nurses say you've been having dreams, she said one afternoon while knitting beside my bed. She didn't look up from her needles. Not dreams, Mom. She nodded, still focused on her knitting. Pastor Williams asked if he could visit you. Said he's counseled other soldiers who've had experiences. I don't need a pastor. Now she did look up, her eyes meeting mine. Maybe not for the reasons you think. He's a good listener, that's all. I agreed to the visit more to please her than anything else. Pastor Williams turned out to be younger than I expected. Maybe early 40s with a relaxed manner that didn't scream clergy. He'd been a military chaplain before returning to civilian ministry, which explained his ease in the hospital setting. After brief introductions, he surprised me by not launching into religious talk. Instead, he asked about my unit, my deployment, my recovery. He knew the right questions to ask and, more importantly, when to just listen. Only after nearly an hour of conversation did he broach the subject. Your mother mentioned you had a significant experience during your injury. I tensed slightly. That's one way to put it. I've spoken with other service members who've had similar experiences, he said matter-of-factly. Each one unique, but with common elements. Like the light, I said. He nodded. Like the light. like the sense of encountering something beyond our normal understanding, like receiving information or insights that seem impossible to have known otherwise. Something in his tone made me ask, have you had one yourself? A small smile. No, but I've come to believe those who have. There's a consistency to the accounts, even across different religious backgrounds, cultures, time periods. It's fascinating, actually. Most people just think I had brain damage or was hallucinating. That's certainly the scientific explanation, he acknowledged. And science has validity. I'm not dismissing it. But science is limited to studying the material world. If there's something beyond that, he shrugged. I saw soldiers, I told him, from all throughout history. And they were, I don't know how to describe it, at peace but still themselves. Still soldiers. Pastor Williams didn't seem surprised or skeptical. The communion of warriors, he said thoughtfully. That's a powerful vision. Gunfire, communion. Community might be a better word. The idea that those who've shared similar experiences, in this case military service and sacrifice, remain connected even beyond death. I hadn't thought of it that way, but it resonated. They were waiting, watching over those still fighting. He nodded. Guardian angels in a sense, though not in the classical religious depiction. We talked for another hour. Pastor Williams never pushed religious doctrine on me, never tried to fit my experience into any particular theological framework. Instead, he offered perspectives from various spiritual traditions, historical accounts of similar experiences, and most importantly, a sense that what had happened to me was part of a larger pattern of human encounter with something beyond our ordinary understanding. Before leaving, he gave me a book, not the Bible, as I half expected, but a collection of near-death experience accounts from people of various backgrounds, including soldiers from different conflicts. Reading others' experiences might help you process your own, he suggested. And if you ever want to talk more, I'm available. I found myself taking him up on that offer several times during my recovery. Our conversations never led to any dramatic religious conversion on my part, but they helped me articulate and understand what I'd experienced in a way that the psychiatric sessions couldn't quite match. By the 6th month of my recovery, I was walking with a cane and had regained most of the function in my left arm. The physical wounds were healing, albeit with impressive scars and lingering pain that the doctors said might never fully disappear. The invisible wounds, the PTSD, the survivor's guilt, the disorientation of returning to civilian life were proving more stubborn. I was sitting in the hospital garden one afternoon, enjoying the spring sunshine and the small measure of privacy it afforded, when a woman approached my bench. She was middle-aged, conservatively dressed, with a careful dignity in her bearing that suggested someone holding themselves together through sheer will. "Sergeant Ritter?" she asked. I nodded, struggling to place her. "A doctor's wife, perhaps? Someone from the hospital administration?" "I'm Catherine Rodriguez," she said. "Rod's mother." The name hit me like physical blow. Rodriguez, my driver, killed instantly in the ambush that nearly took me as well. I started to stand, an instinctive show of respect, but she gestured for me to remain seated. "Please don't get up." "May I join you?" I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "What do you say to the mother of a man who died while you survived?" What possible words could matter? She sat beside me, hands folded in her lap, looking out at the garden rather than directly at me. "Lieutenant Parker came to see us," she said after a moment. "He told us about your experience." I was stunned. The lieutenant had actually shared that with Rodriguez's parents? It seemed out of character for his cautious demeanor. "He said you saw other soldiers who had died, but that Marcus wasn't among them." "That's right," I confirmed, unsure where this was heading. I think he was still on his journey. I wasn't in that place very long." She nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Marcus was always late," she said with the ghost of a smile. "Even as a little boy. His father and I joked that he'd be late to his own funeral." The smile faded. "I suppose he was." We sat in silence for a moment, the spring breeze rustling the new leaves above us. "Lieutenant Parker said you believed they were all at peace. The soldiers you saw." "Yes, ma'am. More than at peace. They were, to my fulfilled somehow, like they understood something the rest of us don't." "Mrs." Rodriguez turned to look at me directly for the first time. Her eyes were dark like her son's, intelligent and assessing. "Do you believe Marcus is with them now?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes, ma'am, I do." "But you didn't see him." "No. But I know that's where he was going. Where we're all going, eventually." She studied my face for a long moment, as if searching for any sign of deception or well-intentioned pity. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her. Marcus wrote to me about you. She said, he called you professor, said you were the smartest sergeant in the company, always questioning things, never taking anything on faith. I felt a pang of grief and fondness. That sounds like Rod. He also said you were the one person he'd trust with his life. Her voice wavered slightly. So I trust you with this truth about my son. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just nodded. Thank you for sharing your experience with Lieutenant Parker, she continued. And for speaking with me today. It brings me comfort. I'm glad, I said sincerely. Though I'm sorry I didn't see Rod there. I wish I could tell you more. She shook her head. You've told me enough. The rest is between me and God. And Marcus, wherever he is now. Before she left, Mrs. Rodriguez handed me a small object, a Saint Christopher medal on a chain. Marcus carried this on his first deployment. He left it home this time. She paused, composing herself. I'd like you to have it. I can't accept this, I began. Please, she insisted. It would mean a lot to me to know you have it. I closed my fingers around the medal, feeling its weight, its significance. Thank you, ma'am. She nodded once, stood, and walked away with that same careful dignity. I watched her go, the medal warm in my palm, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the strange lightness of connection. That evening, I called Pastor Williams and asked if his offer to talk was still open. The remainder of my recovery at Walter Reed followed a rhythm. Physical therapy in the mornings, medical appointments, occasional psychiatric sessions with Dr. Levine, and increasingly, conversations with other wounded soldiers who had heard about my experience. It started slowly at first. A Marine down the hall who had lost both legs in Fallujah asked if the rumors were true. Had I really died and come back? A sergeant recovering from burns suffered when his tank was hit by an RPG wanted to know if I'd seen his gunner, killed in the same attack. An Air Force pararescue man with a traumatic brain injury confided that he'd had a similar experience during a helicopter crash, but had been afraid to tell anyone for fear of being labeled unstable. Word spread through the hospital grapevine. Not everyone approached me. Many surely dismissed the story as the ramblings of a traumatized soldier or attention-seeking behavior. But those who did come to my room or seek me out in the physical therapy center or the garden shared a common need. The need to make sense of loss, to find meaning in suffering, to believe that their sacrifices and those of their fallen comrades had purpose beyond the political objectives of the war. I told my story simply, without embellishment or religious interpretation. I described what I had seen and felt, the message I had received, the profound sense of being known and loved by something far greater than myself. I didn't claim to understand it fully or to have all the answers. I just shared what had happened to me and let them draw their own conclusions. Some wept. Some nodded in recognition. Some asked questions I couldn't answer. Some shared their own brushes with death, their own glimpses beyond the veil. We formed an informal community of the wounded seeking healing not just for our bodies, but for our souls. Dr. Levine noticed the change in me. You seem more at peace, she observed during one of our sessions. Sharing helps, I admitted. Knowing it matters to people. You found your purpose in this, she said. It wasn't a question. I think it found me. As my discharge date approached, I had to make decisions about what came next. My injuries had earned me a medical retirement from the Army. My military career was over. I could return to Oklahoma, live with my parents while continuing rehabilitation, maybe use my GI Bill to go back to college. But something else was calling me. The conversations I'd had with wounded soldiers at Walter Reed had shown me there was a need for spaces where veterans could discuss not just the trauma of war, but the deeper spiritual and existential questions it raised. Questions about meaning, purpose, life after death, the nature of sacrifice. With guidance from Pastor Williams and unexpected support from Dr. Levine, I connected with a non-denominational veterans support organization that was developing programs addressing the moral injuries of war, the damage done not just to bodies and minds, but to hearts and souls. They were interested in my experience, not as a religious testimony, but as a perspective that might bring comfort and meaning to veterans struggling with loss and trauma. They invited me to speak at a retreat for combat veterans with PTSD, sharing my story alongside other veterans with different experiences and insights. The retreat was held at a simple conference center in the Virginia countryside, far from the institutional feel of the hospital or the chaos of urban life. 25 veterans attended, men and women from different service branches, different wars, different backgrounds, some religious, some not. all carrying visible and invisible wounds. Standing before them that first evening, leaning on my cane, I felt a momentary panic. Who was I to offer them anything? My experience, however profound it had been for me, might mean nothing to them. Or worse, might seem like a false comfort, a convenient fantasy to avoid facing the brutal reality of war and death. But as I began to speak simply and honestly, I saw the change in their faces. Not everyone, of course. Some remained skeptical, arms crossed, expressions guarded. But others leaned forward, eyes locked on mine. Recognition dawning as I described the tunnel of light, the assembled soldiers, the profound sense of purpose and connection. After I finished speaking, the questions came. Thoughtful, probing, sometimes challenging. "Did you see anyone from Vietnam?" asked an older veteran with haunted eyes. "Yes," I told him. "There were soldiers from every era." Were they still damaged?" asked a woman who'd lost her arm in an IED explosion. "I mean, were they whole again?" "They seemed whole," I said. "Not just physically, but in a deeper way. Like the best version of themselves." "Do you think God sent you back?" asked a Marine with a cross tattooed on his forearm. "I don't know if I'd use that name," I answered honestly. "But something powerful and loving did, yes. Something that knows us better than we know ourselves." "Why you?" The question came from a soldier at the back, his tone not accusatory but genuinely curious. "Why were you the one who got to see this and come back?" It was the question I'd asked myself countless times during my recovery. "I don't know," I admitted. "I wasn't special. I wasn't particularly spiritual. Maybe that's why. Because I was the skeptic, the one who needed the most convincing. Or maybe it was random chance, and I just happened to be the one who came back." I looked around the room, meeting their eyes. But I don't think the message was just for me. I think it's for all of us. That's why I'm sharing it. The conversation continued late into the night. Veterans sharing their own experiences with death, with loss, with the spiritual questions that combat forces us to confront. Some had had their own brushes with the other side, though few as vivid or extensive as mine. Others had felt the presence of fallen comrades in dreams or in moments of crisis. Still others had experienced nothing beyond the brutal physical reality of war and its aftermath. But something happened in that circle of wounded warriors. A space opened up where these experiences and questions could be shared without judgment, without the clinical framing of hallucination or coping mechanism, without religious dogma or forced interpretation. Just human beings wrestling together with the deepest mysteries of existence, finding connection in the struggle. I continued working with the organization, participating in more retreats, gradually taking on a leadership role in developing programs specifically addressing the spiritual dimensions of combat trauma. We weren't offering easy answers or religious conversion, just safe spaces for warriors to explore these questions together, to find meaning in their suffering and purpose in their survival. The work took me across the country, speaking to veterans groups, visiting VA hospitals, connecting with military chaplains and mental health professionals, interested in more holistic approaches to healing. I shared my story hundreds of times, always in the same straightforward way, always emphasizing that I didn't have all the answers, just an experience that had transformed my understanding of life and death. Along the way, I encountered both passionate supporters and dedicated skeptics. Some religious leaders embraced my story as confirmation of their teachings about the afterlife, though I was careful not to align myself with any particular doctrine. Some scientists and doctors dismissed my experience as the predictable result of a traumatized, oxygen-deprived brain, though I found many were more open-minded than I expected. The veterans themselves, particularly those who had come closest to death, were often the most receptive. They recognized something authentic in my account that resonated with their own experiences or intuitions. Even those who remained skeptical of the supernatural elements appreciated the underlying message. That suffering can have meaning, that connection persists beyond death, that love is the fundamental reality. 3 years after the ambush that nearly killed me, I found myself sitting in a television studio, about to share my story with a national audience for the first time. The producer of a documentary series on near-death experiences had heard about my work with veterans and invited me to participate in an episode featuring NDEs in combat situations. As the makeup artist finished powdering my face to reduce the glare from the studio lights, I fingered the same Christopher medal that I still wore on a chain around my neck. Rodriguez's medal, a tangible connection to my fallen friend and a reminder of why I was doing this. "We're ready for you, Sergeant Ritter," the production assistant said, leading me to the set where the host waited. Just Michael is fine. I told her, I'm not in the Army anymore. The interview went well. The host was respectful, asking thoughtful questions without trying to sensationalize my experience or force it into a particular narrative. I spoke about the ambush, the moment of death, the journey to the other side, and my return with the same straightforward honesty I'd developed over years of sharing the story. Near the end of the interview, the host asked a question I hadn't anticipated. After everything you've experienced, the trauma of war, your brush with death, your spiritual awakening, do you have any regrets about your military service? I considered the question carefully. I regret that we lost good people, I said finally. I regret the suffering that war inevitably causes, for soldiers and civilians alike. But I don't regret serving. And as strange as it might sound, I don't regret what happened to me that day outside Bakba. Because of the spiritual experience it gave you, the host prompted. Partly that, but also because it showed me that what seems like an ending is often a doorway. That's true for individual lives, and maybe it's true for our collective journey too. Maybe all our conflicts and struggles are leading somewhere meaningful, even when we can't see it from our limited perspective. After the interview aired, the response was overwhelming. Emails and letters poured in, from veterans and their families, from people who had lost loved ones, from those who had experienced their own NDEs, from skeptics with questions, from spiritual seekers with theories. I couldn't respond to them all individually, but I read everyone. Each represented a person grappling with the same fundamental questions that had transformed my life. What happens when we die? Is there purpose to suffering? Does love transcend death? Are we connected to something greater than ourselves? One email in particular stood out. It was from a woman whose son had been killed in Afghanistan 2 years earlier. I watched your interview 3 times, she wrote. The third time, I finally heard what my heart needed to hear. Not that there's a heaven where my son is waiting, though that would be comfort enough, but that the love between us still exists, that it's real and permanent in a way that transcends physical life. That connection can't be broken, not by distance, not by time, not even by death. Thank you for reminding me of what I already knew. Her words crystallized something I had been gradually understanding through all my conversations with veterans and families of the fallen. The most powerful aspect of my experience wasn't the supernatural elements, the tunnel of light, the assembly of soldiers, the divine presence. It was the revelation that love and connection are the fundamental realities that underlie everything else. That was the message I had been sent back to share. Not a doctrine or a theological system or a definitive map of the afterlife, but a simple truth known by mystics and poets throughout human history. Love persists. Connection endures. Nothing that truly matters is ever really lost. 10 years after the ambush in Iraq, I stood on a hillside in Arlington National Cemetery, Rodriguez's saint, Christopher medal still hanging around my neck, watching as another veteran was laid to rest with full military honors. Miller, the young gunner who had lost his arm in the same explosion that nearly killed me, had finally lost his battle with the demons that followed him home from war. His suicide hit me hard. We had stayed in touch over the years, and I had thought he was doing better. He had a wife, a young daughter, a job he seemed to enjoy. But the invisible wounds of war run deep, and sometimes even the strongest warriors can't find their way back to the light without help. As the honor guard folded the flag draping his casket and presented it to his widow, I found myself wondering, would Miller be there now, among that assembly of soldiers I had seen? Would he find the peace and purpose that had eluded him in life? I wanted to believe he would. After the ceremony, Miller's widow approached me, her eyes red but dry, their daughter clinging to her hand. He talked about you a lot, she said, about what you went through together and what you saw when you died. She glanced down at her daughter, choosing her words carefully. He wanted to believe it. I think in the end he did. He was a good soldier, I said. A good man, she nodded, squeezing her daughter's hand. He left a note. Most of it was for me and Emma, but there was a part for you. She handed me a folded piece of paper. He said you'd understand. I thanked her, tucking the paper into my pocket. It wasn't until later, sitting alone in my hotel room, that I unfolded it and read Miller's final message to me. Professor, it read, I'm tired of fighting. If what you saw is real, I'll see you on the other side someday. Save me a spot in the formation. And if you're right about the message, that love is what lasts, then I'll never really leave Emma and Jen. Watch over them for me until we meet again. I wept then, for Miller, for Rodriguez, for all the soldiers who never made it home, or who came home so broken they couldn't find their way back to wholeness. I wept for the limits of my understanding, for the inadequacy of the message I had been trying to share, for my failure to reach the one person who had been right beside me when it all happened. Yet even in that moment of grief and doubt, I felt again what I had felt in that realm of light, a profound sense of being held within something greater than myself, something that embraced both the pain and the healing, the darkness and the light, the separation and the reunion. The next morning I visited Miller's widow and daughter again. I told them about the soldiers I had seen, about how they had appeared whole and at peace, about the sense of purpose and connection that permeated that other realm. I shared my conviction that Miller was among them now, free from the pain that had haunted him, still connected to those he loved. Whether it brought them comfort, I couldn't say for certain. But as I prepared to leave, Miller's daughter, Emma, looked up at me with serious eyes. "Daddy told me about the soldiers in the light," she said. "He said that's where he was going, and that he'd watch over me from there." "I believe he will," I told her. As I drove away from their home, I thought about all the paths that had led me to this moment. The decision to join the army, the deployments to Iraq, the ambush that nearly ended my life, the journey to the other side and back again, the years of sharing my story with other veterans and families of the fallen. None of it had gone according to any plan I had made for my life. Yet all of it, somehow, seemed to flow together with a purpose I couldn't have imagined but could now recognize. Even the darkest moments, the deaths of my friends, my own brush with oblivion, Miller's final surrender to his pain, were threads in a larger tapestry I could only glimpse. The message I had been given continued to unfold in meaning. The light is real, and it waits for everyone. Love persists beyond death. What divides us in life is meaningless in death. Everything has purpose. Simple words, yet containing depths I was still exploring, still trying to live by, still working to share with others who needed to hear them. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my hotel room, watching the sunset over the Washington Monument in the distance. As the light faded from the sky, I closed my eyes and felt again the presence of something vast and loving that permeated everything. The same presence I had encountered in that realm beyond death. It was always there, I realized, not just in dramatic near-death moments or spiritual revelations, but in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in the connections between people, in the love that persists through separation and loss, in the meaning we find in our suffering and our joy. The light I saw that day in Iraq still gives me hope. Not a naive hope that ignores the reality of pain and loss, but a deeper hope grounded in the conviction that what we see and experience in this life is only part of a larger reality. That our stories don't end with death, but continue in ways we can barely imagine from this side of the veil. That's the message I was sent back to share. That's why I came back. And on the days when doubt creeps in, when the memory of that other realm seems distant and dreamlike, when the pain of my physical wounds or the grief for my fallen comrades threatens to overwhelm me, I return to the simplest truth I learned on the other side. Love is what lasts. Love is what transcends the boundary between life and death. Love is what connects us to each other and to whatever greater reality awaits beyond the light. That truth sustains me. It guides my work with other veterans and families of the fallen. It shapes how I live each day I've been given since that ambush outside Bakuba. And it gives me peace when I contemplate my own eventual return to that realm of light and understanding. I don't know when that return will come. I don't know what other paths my life will take before then. But I know that when the time comes, I'll recognize the way. I'll see again those soldiers standing in formation. Rodriguez, Miller, and all the others who have gone before. And I'll understand fully at last why I was sent back to share this message. The light is real. It waits for all of us. And in its embrace, we find our way home.